She met him in the worst moment of her life, and that's probably why it felt so right. Mia was 27 when her father died. She'd just moved back to the small town she once swore she'd never return to. It smelled the same, pine needles and regret. Her plan was simple: sell the house, pack up his memories, and leave again before anything could make her feel. But then there was Elijah. He worked at the old bookstore downtown, the one with creaking floors and second-hand chairs nobody ever really bought. He had a quiet way of listening that made silence feel less heavy, and the kind of eyes that looked like they'd seen every kind of grief, and stayed soft anyway. Their connection wasn't explosive. It didn't burn, it bled, slow, aching, and deeply. He'd walk her home after work. She'd leave him coffee on the bookstore steps. They never said what they were building, but they both kept showing up. Until the night she told him she might stay in town. And he looked away. That night changed something. He didn't leave, not right away. But he stopped asking questions. He stopped leaning in. One morning he sat across from her with both hands around his cup and said, "I have to go." Mia blinked. "Go where?" "My brother, he's not well, and I need to help him. I don't know how long it'll be. Could be weeks, months, but..." He hesitated. "Please don't move on yet. I just need to know I'm not losing everything while I'm trying to fix something else." Mia didn't answer right away. The room was quiet except for the drip from the kitchen sink. She could feel the weight of his ask, like a rope around her heart, pulling in two directions. Finally she whispered, "I'll wait, but don't disappear." The first week felt like holding her breath. He sent her a photo of the road, then one of his brother's house, then silence. Days stretched into weeks. His messages turned short, vague. She told herself not to overthink it, that he was just overwhelmed, that he'd be back, just like he promised. But grief has a way of sharpening the edges of loneliness. And after her father, Elijah had been the only thing that felt like home. One night she walked into the bookstore, hoping maybe he'd left something. The owner handed her a small envelope. No name, just her handwriting on the outside. Her own. She'd written it months ago and left it for herself in one of the books he loved. A ritual she'd started during her darkest days. Reminders that she was still here. She opened it. "You are not something to be paused," she cried. On the floor between the poetry shelves, people started talking. Not cruelly, just the way small towns do. "So what happened to that boy from the bookstore? Still waiting? You know, men come and go, but you..." She smiled. She laughed. But the truth was, something inside her was unraveling. She tried writing. Didn't work. Tried calling him. Straight to voicemail. She tried to freeze time to stay as still as the promise he left. But life kept pushing forward. She felt it in her body, in the mornings, in the ache behind her ribs. Something was changing. Not just emotionally, but physically. And that's when she knew. She wasn't alone anymore, but not the way she expected. Not the way anyone expected. Mia had met Nathan 3 weeks after Elijah left. He was a counselor at the grief support group she reluctantly joined. He was careful, kind, and so incredibly respectful of her silence that it made her speak. She didn't sleep with him out of rebellion or desperation. It wasn't a dramatic betrayal. It was two broken people trying to stitch comfort into a world that felt like it had stopped making sense. Once, just once. When the test turned positive, she sat on her porch for hours, watching the wind move through the dead trees, and then she decided she would keep it. Not as revenge, not as replacement, just because she needed something that didn't leave. Weeks passed. Her belly began to round, her skin softened. The bookstore stopped smelling like him. Her room started to feel like hers. She stopped waiting, not in anger, but in release. Until one day, 5 months later, Someone knocked on her door. It was early. Gray light. No warning. When she opened, her breath caught. It was Elijah. Thinner. Pale. Eyes tired. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Because he looked down at her stomach and froze. She watched him fall apart without touching him. She watched 100 questions rush to his face and none escape his lips. She said the only thing she could. "You asked me to wait, but I didn't stop living." And he stepped back, like the words had weight. Elijah hadn't expected her to look the same. He just hadn't expected her to look like that. There was no anger in her eyes, no panic, no guilt. Just a calm resignation that said she'd already walked through a storm and survived it without him. The belly said what she didn't. He tried to speak, to ask something, anything, but he couldn't. And that silence, that same silence he used when he walked away, now strangled him. She didn't invite him in. She didn't close the door either. She just walked back inside, barefoot, slow, leaving the door half open behind her. He hesitated, then stepped in. The house smelled of lemon soap and something like lavender. It was clean, alive, lived in. It felt like her, but also like something he'd never seen. She moved differently now, as if carrying life made her sacred and distant. He sat on the couch he once helped carry through that front door, the same couch where they once shared slices of frozen pizza and unspoken fears. Now it felt foreign. She brought him water. Not coffee, not tea, just water. As if to say, "I'm not pretending this is anything other than what it is." Finally he spoke. "Whose is it?" Mia didn't flinch. "Mine." He looked down. His hands trembled. "You said you'd wait." "I did," she replied. "And then I realized I was the only one still here." He wanted to explain, truly. But what could he say that wouldn't sound like excuse? "My brother was worse than I thought. I didn't know how to handle it. There were days I didn't even eat. I wanted to call you. I just didn't know how to come back." All of it was true, but none of it mattered. She wasn't asking him to justify anything. She wasn't angry, that made it worse. Anger meant there was still something between them. But this quiet, this acceptance, it felt like a closed door with no handle on his side. "You look strong," he said. She smiled, gently. "I had to be." They sat in silence for a while, interrupted only by the wind brushing against the windows. Then she asked, "Did you come back for me?" The question hit harder than anything else, because the truth was, he didn't know. He didn't have a plan. He'd thought about her every single day, imagined their reunion 100 different ways. In none of those, she was pregnant. In none of those, she was okay without him. So what now? What did he think he'd say? And what could possibly matter now? "I came back to see if you were still mine," he admitted. Her eyes softened, but not the way he hoped. "You never owned me, Elijah," he swallowed. "I know, but I thought maybe we could finish what we started." She didn't respond right away. Then she got up and walked into the kitchen. He heard her opening a drawer, rustling something. When she returned, she held a photo. It was old, the two of them. On that first afternoon they stayed at the lake, sunburnt and silly. She was laughing mid-bite of a peach. He was looking at her like he already knew he'd mess it up someday. "I used to carry this with me," she said, placing it gently on the table. "Even after you left. Every day." Then she pointed to her belly. "Now I carry this." He nodded slowly. Tears threatened the edge of his voice. Are you with him? The father?" Mia shook her head. "No, it wasn't a love story. It was just a moment of needing to feel seen." He looked down, ashamed. "I should have been here." She didn't argue. That would have been cruel. Instead, she offered something he didn't expect. "Do you want to feel her kick?" He looked up, stunned. She took his hand gently, guided it to the side of her belly. And just like that, life moved beneath his fingers. Not his child, not his story, but a heartbeat in the same world where his silence once echoed too loud. He looked at her and whispered, "I'm sorry." She nodded. "So am I." As he left that night, the air outside felt colder than when he arrived. The streets hadn't changed, but he had. There was no drama, no screaming, no chase to win her back. He had arrived too late to reclaim the girl, who used to wait. But perhaps, just perhaps, he wasn't too late to become a better man because of it. Elijah didn't sleep that night. He lay in the same room he grew up in, staring at the ceiling like it still held constellations of a childhood he no longer believed in. The conversation replayed in his mind over and over again. Not because of what was said, but because of what couldn't be undone. Every word Mia had spoken carried the weight of someone who had loved deeply, and had already buried that love in silence. And yet, she'd let him touch her stomach, had let him feel that quiet pulse of life growing inside her. Not to offer a second chance, not to punish, but to show him that she hadn't stopped living, that she couldn't afford to. He remembered the early days, how she used to collect coffee sleeves with little notes written on them. He used to laugh at it, thinking it was quirky. Now he wondered if she'd left one with his name, and if he'd ever go back and read what he missed. He thought of writing her a letter, but every sentence he imagined began with, "I'm sorry," and ended with something that no longer mattered. The truth was, he hadn't just left her. He'd abandoned himself in the process, left the version of himself that was building something beautiful, just to hold together the broken parts of a family that never chose him back. He thought of the way she once looked at him across the table at that diner, the one with the squeaky fan and the world's worst coffee, and how even in silence, she made him feel heard. No one had done that since. The next morning, he stood outside her house again. He didn't knock. He just stood there, hands in pockets, watching her through the kitchen window as she peeled an orange, with the slow care of someone who'd learned that time doesn't rush healing. She didn't see him. Or maybe she did and chose not to react. He didn't know. But something in him whispered that maybe watching her live her truth, without trying to disrupt it, was the only kind of love he had left to give. He remembered how she used to hum while cooking, and now he strained to hear if she still did. The silence between them, once filled with potential, now hung like unfinished sentences. He turned to leave, but halfway down the block, a voice called out. Not hers. An older woman from across the street, the neighbor who'd once scolded them for kissing on the porch like teenagers. She waved him over and handed him a small envelope. "She dropped this in my mailbox by mistake," the woman said, with a curious glance. Said it wasn't important, but her handwriting looked like it was meant for someone. Her tone was light, but her eyes were heavy with the kind of knowing only age could earn. He didn't open it until he got to his truck. The paper was soft, slightly wrinkled. Inside was a note, short, handwritten, unmistakably hers. "I don't hate you. I just finally love myself more." He held the note in his lap for a long time, letting the weight of each word press into him like a slow burn. It wasn't closure, not really, but it was clarity. And for the first time in months, he didn't feel lost. He felt sad, yes, regretful, but not directionless. Sometimes the consequence of silence isn't punishment. It's peace granted to someone else. Peace you no longer get to share. And somehow he respected her more for choosing that peace. He realized he hadn't lost her the day she moved on. He lost her the moment he chose not to stay. That afternoon, he drove to the lake where they once stayed up all night watching the sky change colors. The dock was old, the boards weathered, but still held firm. He sat at the edge with his legs dangling over the water, holding the note in one hand and a stone in the other. He thought about skipping it across the lake, like they used to, but instead he placed it gently into the water and watched it soften, dissolve, drift. The words didn't vanish instantly. They blurred, bent, soaked into the current slowly, like memory refusing to be erased. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't redemption. But it was something he could give back to the moment, something small and quiet, and just for her. He spoke aloud, to no one in particular. "I hope you never forget how much you were worth. Even when I couldn't see it." It was the kind of line that might have sounded rehearsed anywhere else. But there, it felt like the only truth he had left to give. Behind him, someone's child laughed in the distance. He didn't turn to look. He just closed his eyes and breathed in the sound, wondering what kind of father he could have been if he'd chosen differently. Wondering if someday, in another life, she might have waited, and he might have arrived on time. And though the wind carried no answers, he sat there until the sun dipped below the horizon, until the light was gone, and with it, the last of what he hadn't said. It had been a week since Elijah stood on Mia's porch, and every day since felt like a quiet war inside his chest. Not the explosive kind. The kind where no one speaks, but everything is falling apart. He kept replaying her words in his mind. I didn't stop living. And it echoed in the silence of his days like a sentence he hadn't earned the right to forget. There were things he wished he had said, but the truth was, he didn't have the language then. And now, the moment had passed. She had passed through something he wasn't part of, and that changed everything. He didn't text, he didn't call, he just let her be. And for the first time in years, he tried to understand the difference between loving someone and needing them to need you back. Then came the email. It was short. No subject line, no greeting. Just a single sentence that blinked on his screen, like a lifeline or a trap. "There's something I think you deserve to know, if you want to." It was from Mia. Sent at 3:17 a.m. He didn't respond immediately. He stared at it, reading and rereading the words. The phrasing was deliberate. "Not something I want to tell you, but something you deserve to know." That mattered. That phrasing meant it wasn't about closure, and it wasn't about him. It was about the truth. And she was giving him a choice. He replied, "Tell me." An hour later, he received a follow-up. An address, a time. No explanation, Elijah. Almost didn't go. But the weight of the unknown is often heavier than the fear of what it might reveal. When he arrived, it wasn't at her house. It was a small, familiar community center on the edge of town. The kind used for AA meetings or book clubs, with faded posters and broken vending machines. Inside, chairs were arranged in a circle. People sat quietly, some with coffee, others with just their arms crossed, as if holding themselves together. Mia sat near the back, not leading, not hiding, just present. She didn't look at him when he entered. She simply gestured to an empty seat beside her, and he took it. The session started. It wasn't what he expected. No one introduced him. No dramatic moment. It was just people, regular people, talking about grief, addiction, betrayal, loss. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't confessional. It was just honest, raw. And then Mia spoke. She didn't say his name, didn't mention their story directly, but her words hit him like glass under skin. "There was a time when I thought waiting meant loyalty," she said, her voice steady. "That if I just held on tight enough, the person I loved would come back, and everything would return to the way it was. But sometimes waiting becomes self-abandonment. And love shouldn't cost you yourself." Elijah stared at the floor. He couldn't look at her. Not now. Not after hearing that. After the session, people began to leave quietly, some nodding to Mia, others hugging briefly before slipping out into the night. She stayed behind, folding chairs, as if the act of organizing the room would also help organize what was still tangled inside her. Elijah approached slowly, unsure of how close was still allowed. "You brought me here for a reason," he said. She didn't look up. "I brought you here so you'd understand that I didn't move on to punish you. I moved on because I was drowning." He nodded. "I know that now." They stood in silence for a moment, just the hum of the vending machine and the occasional creak of the old building around them. Then she said something that made him stop breathing for a second. "I named her Ellie." He turned toward her, heart kicking against his ribs. "Ellie?" She looked at him then. Really looked. "I didn't name her after you, but I won't lie. Part of me did it because I wanted to remember who I was when I still believed we'd become something." He felt that like a wound and a gift at once. "She's not yours," Mia continued, "but she doesn't belong to anyone else yet either. She's just mine, and she's growing fast." He wanted to ask to see her. He wanted to know her birthday, her habits, whether she liked music, whether she kicked when Mia read poetry aloud. But he knew that asking would be too much, too soon. "I'm not asking for a role in her life," he said. I want you to know that even though I disappeared, I never stopped caring." Mia exhaled. Not with anger, not with forgiveness, but with the tired relief of someone no longer holding anything back. "You don't need to prove anything," she said gently. "You just need to be better from here." Later that night, Elijah found himself parked outside the bookstore where they first met. It was closed, lights off. But in the reflection of the glass, he saw himself. Older, weathered, but still holding fragments of a man who once believed in love enough to ask someone to wait. He opened the glove compartment and pulled out a pen. On the back of a receipt, he wrote, "She didn't wait, and I didn't deserve her to, but I will spend every day becoming someone who would have been worth the time." He folded the note, walked to the front door, and slid it under the glass. He didn't know if she'd ever see it. That wasn't the point. The point was learning to say things before they were too late, and to stop expecting love to pause its heartbeat for yours. 3 months passed, long enough for the town to change seasons. The trees lining the streets had gone from emerald to rust to bare, like even nature had to let go of its own weight. Elijah stayed in town. Not for her, not exactly, but because leaving again felt too much like repeating the same mistake twice. And maybe, for once, he needed to sit with the things he couldn't fix. He picked up shifts at a warehouse, quiet work that tired his body more than his mind. That was good. Sleep came easier when your bones were sore. Sometimes he'd walk past the bookstore. He never went inside. Not since the night he slid the note under the door. It had vanished the next morning. No reply. No sign. Just silence. But a kind of silence he had grown to respect. Mia was still in town. He'd see her sometimes, crossing the street with her bag of groceries balanced on one hip, or sitting on a bench outside the clinic, hand on her belly, eyes closed like she was breathing. A whole new life into herself. They never spoke. But once, she nodded at him. Just once, and it was enough. He'd learned not to expect closure. Real life rarely ties itself into neat bows. Some doors close without a click. Some people drift like paper on water. Not because they don't care, but because the current took them somewhere you weren't meant to go. Still, he wondered about the baby, about Ellie. Not to take anything. Not to claim what wasn't his. But just to know what had grown in the space he left behind. She was real. She existed because life continued when he didn't. That mattered to him now. One afternoon in late November, he stood outside the community center again. The sky was thick with the threat of snow. He hadn't planned on going in. He told himself he was just walking, just passing by. But his feet, like memories, had a mind of their own. Inside, the room looked the same circle of chairs, same brittle fluorescent lights, same quiet hum of people who didn't know how to speak until someone else went first. Mia wasn't there. He sat anyway, and when it was his turn, he spoke. I waited too long to learn that people aren't chapters you can come back to. They turn. The page with or without you. And you don't get to complain if they write the rest without your name. The room was still. Someone shifted in their chair. Another nodded. But no one interrupted. It wasn't about agreement. It was about presence. I loved someone, he continued. I asked her to wait for me. She did for a while, but life didn't stop, and I don't blame her. I'm glad it didn't, because I think maybe the best kind of love is the kind that teaches you how to stay when it's hard. And I didn't stay. He exhaled. His voice felt lighter than it had in months, not because he'd let go of the guilt, but because he had stopped trying to rewrite the past. After the meeting, he stepped outside and felt the cold settle in his bones. It was snowing. Soft, steady flakes drifting like reminders that even the sky knows how to let go without making noise. He walked toward the diner. It was late, mostly empty. He ordered coffee and sat by the window watching the snow gather on the sidewalk. Then, as if the world knew he wasn't done, the door opened, and Mia walked in. She looked surprised, but not startled. Just there. They didn't speak right away. She ordered tea, sat across from him. She looked different, not tired, not guarded, just full, in the way that women sometimes glow before birth, like they're holding two worlds at once. He didn't ask why she came in. She didn't ask why he was there. Some meetings are just supposed to happen. I heard you spoke today, she said softly. He nodded. I didn't know you'd hear. I wasn't there, she replied. But they told me. He sipped his, coffee. The warmth grounded him. I didn't come to change your mind about me, he said. I know where we stand, I wanted you to know that I'm still here. Not to fix anything, just to honor what was. She studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached into her coat and pulled out a small envelope. This is for you, she said. He took it, unsure, and opened it carefully. Inside was a photo. It was a sonogram. And at the bottom, in Mia's handwriting, a name, Ellie Grace. His throat tightened. He looked up, but she was already rising. I thought you should know, she said, in case you still want to be the kind of man who shows up. Then she walked out, leaving him there. Not with a demand, not with a promise, just an invitation. And for the first time, Elijah realized, maybe love isn't always about holding on. Sometimes it's about learning how to stand still, long enough for someone to choose you again, or for you to finally choose yourself. He folded the photo, placed it gently in his coat pocket, and stepped outside into the snow. And this time, he didn't leave.